All right. Hey guys, my name is Melody Ornelas,
And I'm Isla Garcia.
and this is our midterm one. So the topics that we're going to be going over is race and ethnicity, white nativism, and skin pigmentation. And the last one that we're going to be going over is reticulation and humanity in the birthplace. So our first one that we're going to go over is race and ethnicity. So race is the attempt to invent significant biological distinctions where none truly exist. And so basically what that is the way that we see color and skin and how we judge that as a society. We label that, whereas even a long time ago where all of this first started, it never existed. It was something that was just brought upon as immigrants came to the US. Ethnicity is cultural differences that develop between people who are geographically isolated. So, with ethnicity, we take races and define them into groups such as being Hispanic, being Native American, all of these different ethnicities. So, race is genetically induced upon physiologically physiological traits that, well, ethnicity is learned upon by cultural ways. So, with race, like I said, we see it as color. We determine who is who as a group just based off of what their skin color looks like, regardless if they're white, black, brown, red, it doesn't matter. That's how we determine race. And ethnicity is just determined upon group. So racism is the belief that one group is innately superior to another. So in many cultural ways, especially ours, we see white people as being superior upon all other races. They have more advantages than most other races do, especially in the United States. Racism is the world's greatest social problem because everyday groups of people dehumanize other groups to make them feel belittled and that they are not important to the world. And this is just so that way these main groups have more power than others. Race is an illusionary concept because in all reality, we are all from the same place. We originate from one place in the world, and which is Africa, but because we are different colors, we see it as something totally different. We don't see each other as one. Many biologists believe that Charles Darwin is correct with his archaic myth because we are all one species from one place that we originate from, and we don't see it that way, but that's just how it is, and that's where we're from.
Okay, building off to what she said, the modern concept of race emerged from European superstition because they literally thought that they were superior to others just because of their skin tone and because they were Christian. They thought that they were superior to others just because they thought that having white skin tone made them like more pure than people that have color in their skin tone, and they thought that killing Native Americans was something that was as acceptable as killing animals just because they were like savages in their eyes. They really weren't pure at all, and they believed that they shouldn't be on this earth. They didn't want people to procreate with them because their bloodline would no longer be pure, and because Native Americans were literally just animals to them. When it comes to more modern racism, like racism against Black and Hispanic people, they were viewed as property because at one point that's all they really were. They not only would sell them like animals, but when slavery ended, they still treated them as if they were inferior just because they had color in their skin. They thought they weren't worthy of being something, or they weren't worthy of being in the same schools as them, and they weren't even allowed to drink out of the same fountains as them because they honestly thought that they were disgusting people that would pollute their fountains, schools, and businesses. Race is definitely a product of bogus European superiority because biology, or because if you look at the biology of like our makeup, you'll see that a white person and a black person or person of color has the same makeup. And every single one of us is built the same. So saying that white people have better genes and that they are producing better offspring is literally bogus because scientifically we're all the same. Having white skin tone doesn't make you more successful than anyone else, and especially not being more successful than someone that has dark skin tone or is black. And especially just because people who are white, like sometimes they have more African American in them than African Americans do, but you just see it in African Americans more than white people. The Great Chain of Being is a structure of or is a strict hierarchical structure of all matter of life that comes from medieval Christianity to have been decreased by God. This chain starts with God and then it goes down to angels, demons, stars, moons, kings, princes, nobles, commoners, animals, trees, plants, precious stones, and then metals and minerals. The Great Chain of Being justified racism because Europeans thought that they were higher up in the chain than people of color because they actually believed that they were more worthy of God and that God loved them more. They were compared to African American, or they compared African Americans to apes and said that they had similar characteristics. So they literally put a graph up and they put an ape's face compared to an African American's face, and they just compared how similar they were compared to a white person's face. They used it to justify colonization and slavery because it established that certain people were less than human and that it was acceptable to treat them that way. The illusion of race was similar to the prosecution of Galileo because it was thought of that because you are a specific color or race that you are superior to others and that they didn't want anyone to threaten that like Galileo did with the Christian church or the Catholic Church because they didn't want him to threaten their beliefs with heliocentrism. And so in like both things, if you could compare them, you'll notice that whatever threatens what they believe and makes them look not as pure as they really are, they want to shut it out. So they didn't want others to realize like that people of color could be as good as them. So that's why they didn't want them to shine at all. And that is all I have for that question.
Okay, so for our next one, which is white nativism and racism, white nativism is that all Americans are immigrants, but whites are more at home in the US than anywhere else. And that's mainly because since whites had come to the US as immigrants and taken over and made this their homeland, it's basically been their territory. They've been able to create it as their own and make legislation for their own country, and this has just been their go-to place where they feel comfortable. Until Columbus showed up, there was no such thing as pigmentation. So when Columbus did discover this new world, he saw that people of color, of darker skin tones were here. And so at that point, that's when skin pigmentation came around as a thing because they were darker than what his skin tone was. Skin pigmentation is socially constructed because it never used to be a problem until Columbus showed up, and other immigrants recognized this as being different as well. The Columbus myth was that he was accredited for discovering the New World because he was the first quote unquote real man to set foot in the New World. And so, because of that, it is a myth because there was people that were in the New World that already existed in this part, and because he was the one that discovered it and sailed across the sea and found this land, that's what made him accredited for being the first one to come about it. The doctrine of discovery was a papal bull that instructed explorers to treat non-Christians as non-people and their homelands as terra nullius. The relationship between Europeans and indigenous people was destroyed because Europeans let it come upon themselves that they were able to take over lands and that were not rightfully theirs. And because of that, it ruined many relationships because a lot of the people that already originated in the sun, they didn't understand why. They just thought it would be okay for them to come and take over their territory that was theirs from the start. And so it caused a lot of problems from there.
So building on to what she said, the Terra Nullius, more in depth, is basically called no one's land or referred to as nobody's land, which is where they sent people, not really sent, but they kind of segregated that area for like people specifically who don't believe in race or in religion. So they didn't really want other people to get mixed with them just because they didn't want other people there to be like a larger population of people who aren't Christian. So building on to what else you said on white nativism, which rose from the doctrine of discovery. So basically, since they did come and invade the United States, they really did think that they had the right to just because the people that were already there weren't white and they weren't religious. So even the Pope said, if there's already people inhabiting that land, if they aren't religious, then you can kill them. But if they are, you have to respect them. And since they couldn't really communicate their religion, they thought they weren't. But ideally, like Native Americans did have a religion, they did believe in something spiritual. They just weren't like the same concepts of what white people believed in. Um, so since Christopher Columbus and his people were white, Christian, and biologically better, they thought that they really did have the right to invade that land and take it over. Ideally speaking, racism shouldn't exist in any kind of society, but especially not a democratic society, just because democracy stands for everyone is equal. Like everyone should have the same opportunities that others do, and because of racism, we don't really allow that. Back then, not really now anymore, but back then they wouldn't allow people of color and white people to go to the same school, and that's just not how a democratic society should work. We should all have the same chance that others get, and we should all be able to cohabitate and just like live together without problems and without like discriminating people just because they are a different color than you. And do I ever believe that the US will ever be post racial? No, I don't. Just because we have idolized racism so much and just we idolize what people are and what they stand for, and because of their color, a lot of people think that they aren't able to do as much as people who are a different color, which is white, and we'll never ever be able to get that bias out of our minds just because that's how we grew up. And we don't really see people as, oh, that's a lovely African American. We see them like, oh, look at that black person. And we just, like, we just base people's abilities to do something on their skin tone, which I don't think we'll ever be able to get past that just because everyone, like, thinks about it so much.
And I think it's just been so deep in our history as far as racism and all of this good stuff like that. It would probably take many, many generations to even get over like this whole entire racial problem that we have in society. And at that rate, too, I think because of the history, how deep racism has gone, that it would still be there no matter like how much we try to not make it a thing anymore. It'll still be there and it'll still be taught just because that's a part of our history as well.
Yeah, and whenever people of color do something significant, it just blows everyone's minds when it really shouldn't be that big of a deal. Like whenever Obama became president, everyone thought, how could an African American person run this country? And even if he was doing something good, people thought, oh, he's black, like he's not doing what should be done. Even though, like, if Donald Trump were to do some of the things that he did, Donald Trump would be idolized for it. But Obama was put down just because he was black.